So welcome everyone. This is Hunter's Hobby Hangar, episode 1. Um, we're gonna be talking about the different types of grades of Gundam and the pros and cons of each. I'm I'm somewhat still a beginner, but I'm still trying to figure out where where I fall into all this. However, I really want to get going here with the first couple of grades. So the first one we're going to start off with is the high grade. So high grades seem to have a lot of potential, but it's also kind of untapped. So the thing is that the high grades are very cheap, um, which basically makes me feel as though they are the Gundam to go to for customization. Um, I haven't gotten there quite yet. I only have one Gundam that I've thrown a mix of high grade and some leftover real grade parts on, and I'm going to start customizing that here. Um, and the process will probably be put up on the channel as well. I'm trying to figure out where I start and where I end there, but the best part about high grades is the fact that they are quick to make, pretty easy to deal with. The only real con with them, or some like in terms of the model itself and the snap build, is that sometimes the seam lines are a little annoying to deal with. But that can be easily helped with multiple grit of sandpaper and multiple tools in order to get those seam lines off. I mainly use just normal sandpaper and glass file to ensure that the seam lines are completely gone on the model. Um, what else? So the other major con with the high grades is the fact that they are um they don't come with a lot of components in order to actually customize the product. There's not a whole lot of weapons that come with it. Normally, it depends on what kit it is, but there's also not a whole lot of opposable hands for some of the things that you want to do. That can easily be compensated with getting third-party parts packs or whatever on U-Type or your vendor of choice. That's just the one that popped into mind that regularly stocks different hand gestures and such, either at the 144 grade or the 1100 grade. Um, but the major pros to this is that they're cheap. So if you mess up really bad on them, they can easily be replaced. Um, they are um, they're quick builds. So I usually take my time and make sure the nub marks are completely gone before I assemble them and all that kind of stuff. So I think if you're just trimming the nubs and doing a quick snap build before you actually go through and sand your product or go through and get rid of those nubs completely, you're looking at like probably a 2 to 3 hour build for most high grades. It depends on the complexity and the size of that actual high grade at that scale, but I would say on average is about 2 to 3 hours. Um, the other good portion is that, again, I will say they are highly customizable, which means that um, you can basically make any paneling that you want. They're a blank canvas. They don't have a lot of already um, input panel lines onto the Gundam's faces, um, or the plane, or just the armor pieces as a whole, I should say. Um, and that can give you a great canvas to create your own version of that Gundam, whether you want to cut out some PLA plate and put it on that Gundam, or you want to just do some panel lines and then just give it a quick repaint, and then, or you want to scribe it quick and then just, you know, throw on some quick PLA plate and you're good. Um, unless we're talking about something like the Moon Gundam, which is basically a miniature real grade, but most high grades are not on that scale of detail or complexity. The only other one I can think of is literally the Moon Gundam slightly altered, which is the P Bondi Vargil. Um, but yeah, I think that's the best part about the high grades is that they are such a blank canvas. Um, the next major point with them is the fact that you can keep posing them over and over and over again, and most of the time, especially with some of the newer high grades that are released, they don't have any loose joints, or they don't loosen over time. I think with a lot of the newer models that are at each grade, that becomes less and less of an issue because they keep improving upon the frames so that they actually hold their rigidity depending on how you want to pose them. But I mean, most high grades you can play with a high grade to no end, and it still retains its posability. I think the only other thing I've heard that's on par are some perfect grades. The perfect grade Unleashed being one of them that comes to mind. The only high grades I hear have posability issues are some of the Ironblood Orphan kits. I've only built the high grade Barbados at that scale, and I've had no issues being able to pose that kit, being able to put it in a in a decent action pose. Granted, mine's right now is like kind of like just a standing badass pose, but that's pretty much the only one or the only series so far that I've heard of, and then some of the old um Gundam Seed kits or some of the really old Gundam the Origin kits. But I think that's enough on high grades. So, real grades. They happen to be my favorite grade of model so far. Um, they have the detailing of a master grade, and sometimes a master grade plus. And they're at the scale of 144, which for me is big because that means I can fit more of them in less surface area, and that's big for me because I live in an apartment. So I want to keep my Gundam on display. You can see behind me, I only have two master grades and then one high grade on its side that's weighing on an action base. But other than that, um, there's really not a lot of cons to the real grades. They're highly detailed. They have a lot of panel lines right out of the box. They have a lot of accessories, a lot of weapons, a lot of gimmicks depending on the kit. But I mean, most of them have a lot of kits, even some of the older real grades. Um, some of the cons I can think of is with the earlier real grades. Now, on the earlier real grades, the biggest issue that I could think of was the inner frame. So the inner frame for some of the real grades, the earlier ones, don't hold they don't hold up very well to posing multiple times. Um there's been several posts that I've seen about the original two. So I believe that's the RX-78-2 and the Char Zaku 2. Those two have a lot of issues, both with the just the build in general, but the frame also holding its rigidity over time. Um, I think from what I've heard from experts, because granted, again, I'm somewhat newer to the hobby, um, everything before the tall geese from Gundam Wing, um, has the possibility of having joint issues. The only ones that I've heard that like really don't have issues or are not a hand grenade are the real grade Mark II Titans and AUG. The whole all of it I've heard is like really good. For some reason that frame seems to never have problems. That build never seems to have problems. Um a lot of the ones that I hear that have issues are the Zaku 2 real grades. Now, granted, my first real grade that I built was a Johnny Ridden Zaku 2 real grade. Um, and the biggest problem that I had wasn't with the frame, wasn't with the actual build, but it was when posing it. I've heard of kits being hand grenades or whatever. I'm not going to call this that because it really isn't. This is a minor issue. But one of the panels on the upper torso here, like basically where I'm drawing this area right here on me, there's a small panel there that if you move the arm just right, it pops out. But that's the only problem I've had with it. Um, but it's an annoying kit to build, um, to some degree, because and only for this reason from this build. The rest of the build, I actually really enjoyed it for my first real grade. The armor tubing, man, like I don't know who came up with the idea to make each individual segment, but also make sure that it has two connections that are really, really small because of the way that they mold it. That, I mean, I guess that's the point, so they don't create like a large um stress mark or what have you, but it still leaves enough of a stress mark to be noticeable to the point where it's an annoyance. So if you go to sand it or whatever, you have to come up with some way, like either put it on a toothpick or something, but like you also got to keep it in place. So it's a nightmare. I wound up actually using a tweezer and holding it while I did one side and then going back and then doing the other. But I mean, that took me till pretty much the end to figure out the best way to do it. And that is the most annoying part because I was here spending like a minute on each one. And if you've ever built a real grade Zaku 2 or are planning on it, there is probably at least 35 of those beats. And that's the biggest annoyance that I've had so far with real grades. And I have built, one sec, I built 4. I built like 4.5 because I built the Sky Grasper, real grade Starfighter, or whatever you want to call it, whatever the Sky Grasper is classified as. But I built just the Sky Grasper. I didn't build the launcher or the Sword Strike parts that come with it. But I mean, those are literally just more weapon accessories and stuff, so I doubt they're going to be a huge problem. Um, but I built that. I built the new Gundam Wing TV version, even though I hate saying that because I feel like that is the Gundam Wing, period. The other ones are the Proto Zero and the Gundam Wing Custom, and then the Gundam Wing EW version, like, or the Gundam Wing Zero Custom. Like, when you say Gundam Wing, that's the one I think about. So I built that one. I built the real grade Astray, and I built the real grade Exia at that scale. And like I said, the giant Zaku, but I already went over that. And honestly, they were great builds. Exia, smooth, smooth. I would recommend the real grade Exia for anybody starting out with a real grade kit. I have had absolutely no issues with it. No balance. The posability is great, even though it's an old frame. The build is great. It's simple. It's honestly, if you built a high grade to start out and you're looking for a good real grade to start off on, I would say that. And from what I've heard, probably the tall geese, because they're both simple builds at the real grade scale, and then you start adding on the complexity. What I wouldn't recommend doing is starting off with any real grade Zaku 2, which is what I did. But in a way, that was one of the harder ones, so it made all the other ones seem extremely easy to do. The Gundam Wing and the ones that actually have their inner frame not pre-injected, which these are the new frames that I'm talking about. The old frames are the ones that have issues, but if it's a real grid that does not have that and it has the new inner frame, that's like the MS joint, I believe is what it's called. They're great. I mean, absolutely. I'm gonna be straight up, no problem. The worst part is the fact that it's time consuming. Real grades are gonna be more time consuming than high grades anyway. I would say they probably take, for the old frames, slightly less than master grades because you don't have to build the frame. The frame's already pretty much there for you. You just have to make sure the armor parts are good to go. I don't really have a good estimate because I spread them out over days. I would say probably if you're looking for a straight snap build, probably a whole day, so probably like 8 hours worth of time, I would say. Um, but again, it's hard for me to judge that because I wind up doing cleanup after cleaning up all the nubs and stuff. So, I would say that's probably the case. I would say it's for the Gundam Wing. I would say it's 100% at least 8 hours to get a snap build up. I mean, that thing is beautiful, but you got to put the work in. And it's well worth it. I can tell you that. It's one of the best models I think I have right now. period. I think that's the biggest con, is just the amount of time it takes to build them. And sometimes the parts are really small too. That's another big con. Sometimes the parts are very hard to hold on to. Sometimes they're hard to actually deal with at that scale, to sand, especially parts for the head, because you're building a detailed part at that scale of a master grade, but the parts are really small. And of course, the head is basically the smallest area of the body that you build on any of the kits. So that's the biggest problem that I run into personally, or those are the biggest problems that I run into personally with the real grade. But yeah, I would say that real grades are probably my favorite grades so far to build. Um, the but they are not as diverse as the master grades. And I'll touch on that on a bit here. Now, these are the kits I probably have the least experience with right now. I only have 2 master grades built. I would say that master grades have a decent amount of pros and cons to each of them. So yeah, let's kick it off right to it with the master grade review. All right, so in here, we have a slight like little rotation video of a master grade. That's pretty much it, man. If you want, when I start the next sections, you can overlap that. I might text that to you anyway, so don't worry about it. Just kind of talking to myself, my own thought process. All right. So master grades. Master grades seem to have a lot of pros and a lot of cons to them. So I'm going to start off with the cons for them, because, and don't let this deter you, please, because master grades are great in many ways. I'm just starting off with the cons, and we'll go into the pros. They take up a lot of surface area because they're 1/100 scale, which means if you get an RX-78 at a 1/100 scale, it's going to be larger than the one at the 144 scale. But that means more sprues, period. They have the same amount of armor pieces, and they also have the frames being factored in for them as a real grade. And real grades already come with a decent amount of sprues, but I would say that you can manage to take up the same amount of surface area per se than, or like of a high grade, unless you're starting off with the simplest high grades. But the master grades take up a decent amount of surface area. The Rosette unit death site that I had, or that I just built, that was a lot of sprues. I mean, we're talking like, I would have to look at the instruction manual, but I think it was around 20 sprues, which I fit in my setup here because I have 5 different slots. I just put my sprues in. You can make it work in a decent amount of space, but it's a lot of sprues to handle. It depends how you set up or what works for you to see how much space it actually takes up. The next con that I can really think of for the master grade is the time. I think they take longer than real grades, much longer than real grades, by probably 2 to 4 more hours. If you're looking at the most complex real grade that I have, and then comparing to a real grade, they probably take about as much time. Yeah, they probably take just about as much time. Now, the next major con that I think the master grade has, and this might be blasphemy in the Gundam world, but it's kind of the stuff that it's kind of what I've seen so far, is that, yeah, real grades are at the 1/144 scale. They're also a lot cheaper than master grades. You're looking at probably $30 to $50 depending on the real grade kit. And I think that, especially if you're comparing with some of the old master grades, that a lot of the real grades have more detail than their master grade counterparts. And they usually cost less. So So the biggest con that I have is the bang for your buck for a master grade. Now, what are you actually paying for then, if that's the case? You're probably paying for the amount of material that it takes in order to build one. Straight up, I think it's that simple. Like I said, they take up more surface areas, means more plastic, which means more production time, and that's probably why they cost more. But I don't like the fact that they're not as detailed. Now, again, that depends on the master grades. We're talking about the Freedom 2.0. That thing has a lot of detail. I would say that's probably really good bang for your buck because $55 kit on average, and it's got a lot of panel lines, a lot of really good looking structure. It has a lot of good articulation. But I would say for the most part, because master grades have been around for so long and a lot of them really need a 2.0, that they are it's a real hit or miss. I've heard tragic stories about people that build any of the 00 Gundam master grades besides the Dynamis and the Kyrios. I usually hear those are good builds, but if you're looking at the protagonist, which is either the Exia, the Razor, the Seven Sword, the 00 Quanta, people seem to have a very hard time with them. And for example, from something I personally own, the other master grade I have, which is not the Perfect Strike, the Ale Strike RM. It's an RM, which means that it's been updated. But my Ale Strike wings don't even stay in place anymore. They're already suffering articulation issues on the Ale Strike system itself. The Gundam itself is fine. But the Ale Striker pack is the one that's having the problem, which again, if you're sitting here spending the money for a kit like that, I want my articulation at that scale. And yes, they are model kits. They are not toys. So I'm not saying that. But if all I've done is pose the wings twice on the Ale Striker pack, why is it that all of a sudden they went from this to this? They're not even in the flat plane. They've been down like that. So that's causing some QA issues for me, but that is what it is. Like I said, so also that builds on the other con of price point. But there's also really good master grades are out in that grade too. So I think I'm going to transition to the pro segment now. If there's really any more cons, I'll probably see them as I talk about this because I ramble. But there's also some really, really good master grades. I would actually say that the biggest con of master grades is the fact that the kits are not consistent. You kind of argue that with a real grade, but there's honestly a clear point as to when they're guaranteed to be really good and then guaranteed to be really bad. But for master grades, it's a real hit or miss unless you have some really extensive Gundam knowledge that I certainly don't have. And it all has to do with the time that kit came out and how new it is. But you have kits like the Sazabi Verka that is apparently an incredible kit. The only thing I have is a knockoff Dabon version 1 for the special coating, but I haven't built the Sazabi proper. And I've heard that it is an awesome kit and is really detailed and really has those points that you want to see. Well, like I said, there's kits that are also really bad. My Death Scythe Rosette unit, though, was a pretty solid build. It feels really good. The only problem is that it's a little back heavy, but honestly, I expect that with a wing pack on it for any kit. Anything that has something really large on its back, I'm going to expect it to be, kind of back heavy. I feel like that makes sense because it's physics. And those are easy enough to solve with an action base. So those are kind of minor. But that's my biggest thing, I think, with the master grades is their lack of consistency. Now again, but another pro for these is that I think these are the second best out of the 3 to customize. And here's why. So like I said, the real grades are usually, in my opinion, more detailed than some master grades. I think that's probably pretty agreed on in the Gundam, the Gundam community. I think they are slightly more detailed, but to really customize the real grades, you need a lot of patience and a lot of skill because you're working with smaller panel lines, smaller surface areas, smaller pieces. But with the master grades, you have a lot of pieces you can really grip onto to do your scribing, to do your PLA plate um, additions to the kit, to make a custom weapon or to make a custom armor piece or a custom vent, and they're easier to work with because they're larger. They're larger pieces to work with, which is better in any situation due to dexterity. Um, but yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest marketing points. And a lot of the people that do custom gunpla either do master grade or high grade that I've seen on a regular basis. There's very few real grade Gundam that I've seen customized to that level. Studio G uses the RG New. I don't recall some new, and I think he did an RG Sazabi too. But again, those are the new frames, so they're basically miniature master grade. So, and they're larger kits. The RG New and the RG Sazabi are about the size of a probably standard or small master grade kit. So that kind of holds my point true. Um, but I think that's probably one of the biggest points of them. The other big point is that while being model kits, I think they have better articulation and better joint stability for some of the newer kits than the old real grades. Again, it's just really hard to talk about master grades as a whole because there's so much inconsistency across the board. If we're talking about, an RX 78-2 3.0 versus um a version 1.0, there's going to be a huge amount of difference no matter what you do between those. And master grades, I think, have probably been consistently around the longest and most popular. But that brings to the next point. Where they lack consistency, they make up for in diversity. There are probably about as many master grade kits, not quite obviously because they do it based on popularity of said Gundam, but there's probably just as many, or there's probably what 2 to 3 ratio from master grade to high grade of kits. Like there's a lot of master grade kits that you can get. Um, but damn, like there's a lot of master grade kits you can get. But again, the problem is the consistency. So you have to know which versions you're really going for. And for somebody who's just coming into the hobby, somebody who's a novice, it is really hard to get your bearings on what kits are good and what are not. The only way that I've managed to be able to figure out what kits are good are Facebook pages or Gunpla groups. I'm part of Gundam Builders America and I think Gunpla Builders Worldwide. And it seems as though those are the best ways for a newcomer to really, really figure out what kits are good and which ones are bad. Now, of course, everyone has their bad kit. Everyone, for everyone that says a kit's a hand grenade, there is another person saying that they had absolutely no issues with the kit. It's a matter of looking at multiple reviews to seeing which ones have those comments to begin with, and which kits don't. But so far, a lot of the kits that I've acquired are ones that I don't believe have any real issues. Um, I've heard that the MG Barbados has, I think, either joint issues or just fragility issues with some of the joints. And they have metal frame pieces for that. I might wind up getting that for my resin kit that I have because it's going to be a heavier kit with the resin on it. But for my standard build, I'm probably going to leave it as is, and if I feel the need, I'll get the metal replacement frame parts. But like in terms of articulation, they're probably also the second best. I think real grades usually have better articulation to a degree and better moving parts, but the master grades have a pretty damn close second or runner up. High grades, again, one of their biggest failing points is the fact that their articulation is not nearly the same. Like, you can play with them all day, but their articulation is not even close to that of a real grade or a master grade. Um, Unless it's the moon. Again, the best high grade out there. But I think that that's another really good selling point of the master grades. And also, they take up a lot of surface area, which can be looked at as a con, which is true. But if you have the space, that might be what you're looking for, because they're the only type of kit at the 1/100 scale. Um, and they're not nearly as expensive as the perfect grades. Not even close. The Zazabi Verka is half the price, or more than, or yeah, they're about half the price, and not less than half the price than the probably the closest perfect grade next to it. You're probably looking at $200 plus for any perfect grade. And master grades at their most expensive end are usually around 1 to 120 depending on the kit. But we're talking about some really insane ones at that high price point end. But they're not as affordable, but they're not breaking your bank. Like, I used to play miniature games and used to get into, or like used to paint miniatures and buy them, and I still have them. Um, and you're looking at, you know, probably not even close to half the surface area for the price, or like, you know what I mean. You'll buy a squad or a blister or whatever you want to call it, a squad of 8 figures for $50. That's literally a master grade kit, or you can get close to 2 master grades depending on what model it is. So it's really, really, really hard to say that master grades are unaffordable, but that is, they're more expensive than high grades or real grades, so that's what it is. Um, 1 second, Mike. I'm thinking of any other cons quick or pros. Cut this out. No, I don't really think I have anything. Um, oh, okay, I have another pro. Hold up, Mike. So, one of the last pros that I have for a master grade kit is that they usually come with a decent amount of gimmicks, a decent amount of custom, or a decent amount of weapons, and a decent amount of posable hands. Um, Depending on the kit, you might get ones like some of the real grades that actually have the articulation for each finger, or there are ones that just have their standard posable like hands that slot in there, and that's all you're getting. But they still come with a decent amount of posable hands. So usually get a fist, usually get like a closed grip that actually has open, so you can put any weapon in it. One that is actually slotted, so you can seat the weapon in there, or yeah, seat any weapon in there, and usually an expressive one, usually kind of like that, like just an open palm type one. Um, but they also come with a lot of equipment. My Buster Gundam alone came with, or Buster Gundam, my Death Scythe alone came with its actual Death Scythe and its Buster Shield, but the Buster Shield opens and then it has a beam coming out, which is really cool. But it didn't come with the actual articulated fingers and everything. But again, I've heard mixed things like that, like with the real grades. The posable hands are the same thing. You have to be careful about the rigidity of those. But that's all I really think I have on master grades right now. Um, so to conclude, I think the best kits I built so far, and it definitely you have to get a newer one for it to be the best one on this list, is the real grade. The real grade Gundam have incredible detail for the scale that they're at, and I mean incredible detail for the scale that they are at. They are really articulate. They're a great price point. They have a bunch of customization options, a bunch of posable or hand options with them. Um, a lot of really neat gimmicks. I mean, man, that Wing Gundam, like, I think it's probably the best real grade out right now until the high grade or the real grade new comes out, and I'm sure that or the real grade high new comes out, and then I'm sure that one will take the rifle era, the best real grade out there. It seems like for real grades, every subsequent kit is the best kit, which is what you want to see. You want to see them improve. You want to see them get better. The biggest issue that I see are for the older ones, the frame, the difficulty with customization, the difficulty with articulation, and them actually holding those joints. Some of the detailing, some of the parts actually not staying on the frame or on the kit really well, becoming an actual hand grenade. But other than that, man, I mean, they're great. They don't take up a lot of surface area. They're awesome kits. I can't talk enough about the real great kits. Um, I would say second place for me right now. Granted, I've only built 2 master grades. Take this with a grain of salt. Are the high grade kits? I think there are a lot of really good high grade kits out there because they are diverse, like the master grade, but they're kind of consistent. Unless you're getting some of the really old high grades, which are kind of easier to identify by the box art, by the type of box art they have. A lot of the newer ones have very similar box art across the board, unless it's kind of different series like 00, which even then I think is still the same stylistically, or the IBO kits. The IBO kits definitely have a different feel. They're more like straight anime art style on the outside of the box, like it's coming from a show, just a little more detailed than that. Um, but man, the customization point and the fact that they're affordable makes you want to customize them. They are, in my opinion, the custom builder's Gunpla. And I'm speaking probably out of term here. And I mean for the average like Gundam customizer. If you're good, you're gonna customize master grades. So don't take what I'm saying like in terms of that nobody wants to customize master grades. You do, but if you mess it with a high grade, it takes 5 seconds, or it takes $20 to go out, get another one, and do what you actually want to do with the kit. If you screw up a master grade and get another one, you're $100 in the hole versus 40. That's a pretty big point. Um, and they're just such a blank canvas sometimes. I mean, for 1 second, like right here. This is the backside, but this is the RX-78 Revive one. So it's the newest high grade version of it. I threw on some customization and stuff on it, woo woo, but like it lacks, and that might be something that turns people away. It lacks a lot of panel lines, but it has a lot of really good surfaces to scribe your own. Um, as well as lay PLA plate. Now, granted, this is one of the older Gundams, so like that's how they all look. Like they're very flat. If you're an EFSF person, um, or yeah, EFSF. I had to think about what the acronym was for a second. But man, I mean, this is all leftover parts from other high grades or real grades and stuff I just slapped on it. And I pretty much, besides these thrusters down here, this comes right off. I mean, this is glued to the pack, but that's okay for me because I want to treat this all as one unit anyway. Um, and the sabers still come out. But like this already, like just like this, when I just did this, I was so proud with how it looked already. And now I'm gonna wind up throwing on or scribing some lines on here. Um, possibly adding some PLA plate, but I haven't gone that far yet in terms of my thought process for it. And then I'm gonna paint it up. But like we're looking at a kit that cost me, because of the Hobby Lobby discount, about $10. Like you can't beat that for a customization selling point. You can't beat that. Um, but yeah, I would say that's probably the best point about the high grade. And falling in third is the master grade kit, but not far behind high grade. It's it's tough for me to make that decision because I think it's a really, 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 really solid grade still. But for me, man, the fact that they have so many kits and it's not easy to identify, except for some of the box art. Sometimes you can tell, but sometimes it's just not easy to identify the poor ones because you have some of the ones that are newer that are poor build quality. Um, and I just think I think that's the biggest problem because if you're looking at somebody who doesn't that isn't a part of this Facebook groups or doesn't know what they're getting into, they're gonna have a really hit or miss for finding a kit. They're gonna be like, that one looks cool, and then you start building it, and that shit falls apart. Um, so yeah, I think that's my biggest. I think that's my biggest problem with master grade kits is their inconsistency. There's a lot of them because some of them are really great. Some of them are better than real grades, and I will say that. I'm like, some of them are better than real grades without a fault. But a lot of them are worse than some high grades that are out there. Um, and that's why I think that they fall in third place for me. Now, I also haven't built a perfect grade, so I can't throw that in here in the ranking. From what I've seen and what I've heard, I think it would probably be right under real grade for me, unless it's a PGU, in which case that's probably would be better than a real grade. But the major problem with the perfect grade is the space that it for me is the space that it takes up and the selling point, which is why I don't see myself buying one unless it's a perfect grade unleashed. Um, I mean that's a hefty investment. I mean you're looking at a $280 kit for that one, or it ranges heavily depending on what you're getting in scalpers, but PGU is about probably close to $300, and it's worth it from what I've seen. With the builds and everything, like it's got a lot of really cool features, gimmicks, and details, and posability, and all that. But think about you can buy 3 Sazabi Verkas for that. It's just for me, it's just such a no go. It's just so much investment for a kit. And granted, at the end of the day, it's what you, the builder, wants to do with it and what you're looking for. And that's that's the biggest point for me. I guess at the end of the day, that's the biggest point from me is that I can sit here and tell you my rankings and everything I think about, but it's what you want to do with it. I'm giving you my opinion because I'm a very new builder and this is my take on some of the kits. I've been building Gundam probably for about 4 or 5 months now. Actually, it's probably longer than that. And I probably don't realize it, but that's where I'm at. Is for each grade, they each have their pros and cons, but some have less than others, and some are better built than others. But it depends on what your experience is and what you want to do with the kit and what your end goal is. Do you want a big Gundam that takes up a whole bunch of space? Get a perfect grade. Get a perfect grade because they're going to have a lot of detail on them right out of the kit. You don't really need to customize them. All you really need to do is probably top coat and decal them, and they're good. That's what I didn't hit on for any of the kits. Didn't hit on decals. Well, my bad, people. I'll do it real quick. High grades, really not a whole lot of decals for them. Real grades, decent amount of decals, probably more than master grades. Master grades, good amount of decals, probably less than a real grade. There you go. But perfect grades have probably the most decals out of any of them, because of the sheer scale that they're at. Um, but they take a lot of time to build too. That's why, like, I haven't built a perfect grade, but I can tell you, man, some of the major cons for me is it's just the fact that they're huge, which means that you're looking at taking a bunch of time and all that. Um, but yeah, I mean, for me, I have about a limited space to work with. I like having. I want to have a lot of kits on display. I have a gigantic backlog that I will not talk about. That's in that closet right there. Um, but I would say that the 144 kits overall are probably better than the 100 kits for me right now. I might revisit this at some point once I have more master grades built, which I'm planning on doing soon. So I'm kind of getting used to taking some time for some of those longer builds. But the next build that I think I'm going to do for this channel is the 1144 Dandelion, I think. I'm not quite so sure yet. I'm trying to decide for another IBO kit what I want to do, but it's going to be an IBO kit because it's my favorite series, and I'm really trying to blow through like probably 2 high grades before I go back to a master grade, or kind of do them in conjunction, but kind of mainlining the high grade kit. So stay tuned for that. Um, that's really all I got, guys. Um, so from here at the hangar, thanks for flying on by. Thanks for checking us out. I hope you like your new kit, and hope to see you next time.